This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 54.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba. Ramsey once forgot his son's car seat on a train. He had to run back on a sprained ankle to get it before the train took off. Daddy of the Year.
Hello, SE Nation. I hope you guys are having an excellent day, and I'm so happy you guys are here and listening to this show. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ramsey Majaba. I'm a sales engineer out of Ottawa, Canada, and I'm here to help you enhance your SE skills, find higher paying jobs, and be an overall resource for sales engineers. If you've been listening to the podcast the last few weeks or watching my YouTube channel, which is We the Sales Engineers, you've probably heard of Peter Cohan, and you've watched him critique and provide feedback for a demo that I performed for him. If you have not seen that video, I'll link it in the show notes at wethesalesengineers.com/show 54. Peter wanted to come back on the show to discuss the biggest flaws in a demo, which turns out that is a discovery. A bad discovery always leads to a bad demo, and we wanted to dig into that a bit deeper. If you don't know who Peter is, he will introduce himself shortly in his own unique way. So without further ado, here's Peter. Hey Peter, welcome back to the show.
Thanks very much. Looking forward to it.
Me as well. So we did the kind of a previous meeting together where I demoed something for you. And you mentioned that you feel there's information lacking in the discovery aspect. So before we get started, maybe we can start off, usually I start off by asking people to introduce themselves. I feel like you don't need introduction to most people, but for those who don't know who you are, do you mind just briefly going through that?
Sure. So I like to introduce myself by asking a question in return. Have you ever seen a bad software demonstration? The answer, of course, is typically yes. In many cases, people say I've probably done hundreds myself, and the balance of the introduction is very simple. My purpose in life is to fix that problem.
Nice. So you fix bad demos.
I don't know if I'd phrase it that way. What we try to do is to take demos and simply improve them in a rather dramatic fashion using great demo methodology.
So you're using the politically correct terminology versus my abrupt and in-your-face terminology.
I'm going to have to violently agree with that. Yes. the phrase I like to use is when I'm watching demos is I will and they've asked for feedback. I'll say that was a well-executed traditional demo.
Nice. And I'm reading your book right now, and traditional demo is not a good thing.
Traditional demos has proven to be adequate for the past 25 or 30 years. But it's really become insufficient, and that's the point behind the book and behind the methodology and to a certain degree behind your podcasts.
Right, yes. And the way I see it, traditional demo is where you just go through the features and benefits of your equipment. And the reason that I see people do that is that they didn't do enough discovery or information was not relayed to them to understand what problem they're trying to solve for their customer.
I agree.
All right. So that's the most important part of a demo. I feel the most important part of a demo is the discovery. So maybe we can start with explaining what discovery is, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Well, what I can do here is offer a definition, and then what I'd like to do is tell a brief story of what just took place 1 week ago, almost exactly today. So if I was to define discovery, I would say it is the process of collecting information to enable a precise proposal of a solution to a customer problem. That's a definition of discovery. So what does that mean? And that's really, I think, one of the biggest questions that we need to tackle in this podcast. So let me go back and tell you what happened to me as a customer a week ago. And if you're willing, can I do that?
Yes, please.
So I've been familiar with this organization for a couple of years and really excited about their mainline product. And they announced just about a week ago that they have a new add-on offering And I said, wow, that looks really interesting. So I went to their website. I'd gotten an email, and I went to their website. And what do you think I did?
You requested a demo.
Exactly. I requested a demo. And what happened next, about a few hours later, maybe it was 24 hours later, I got a call from a BDR SDR, business development representative. And he invested 15 minutes on the phone with me. And he asked, I believe, about 5 questions. The first question was, how did you hear about us? And I answered. And he then asked, are you the person to be making the decision? I said, yes. He asked, do you have a budget available? And I said, absolutely. He said, is there a concrete problem you're trying to solve? And I said, why, yes. And then he finally said, do you have a time frame in mind? And I said, yes. At which point he said, terrific. Let me schedule time with one of our demo experts who can go through the product with you. That was that first call. And we'll come back to this in a minute, but I found this really interesting. So we ended up scheduling a second call for me and his demo guy. That took place about 2 days later or so. And that call started off, guess how?
Same way?
Exactly the same way. So I don't know what they're using in terms of their internal processes or a CRM system, but the demo guy started the call by saying, well, let me just ask you a few questions. How did you hear about us? And then, is this a project? Are you the guy? Is there a budget? Is there a timeline? Have you defined the need? And I said, I answered them, and I said, your guy 2 days ago asked those same questions. He said, oh, I didn't really realize that.
Nice.
And then he proceeded to say, okay, well, let me give you an overview, and we can tell you what the product's about. I said, great. So he proceeded to spend about 25 minutes, I think, 20 or 25 minutes, doing an overview of the product that I already knew well and understood. And when he got to the end of the overview, he said, do you have any questions? And I said, well, yes, I'm actually interested in your new offering. Can we take a look at that, or at least let me know what it is? And he said, well, it's really not completely baked yet. It's not completely finished. I said, that's fine. I understand. Software is developed over time, particularly today. And he said, and I said, let's just take a look at what you have. So he then sort of reluctantly went into that product, but it is still immature. It's very interesting. It's got a lot of potential, but it was really fairly immature. And I said at the end of that, well, it looks really interesting. Please keep me on the list as you continue to develop it, because I'm still very much interested. Now, all those series of events totaled up probably only an hour in terms of conversations or interactions with that vendor. But let's do a little dissection here. So let's go back to the very beginning. My objective as a customer was to gain some information about this new product, right? And so I did so following a traditional mechanism of clicking on the give me a demo of that product button. And what happened next?
Well, obviously, an attempt at a discovery, but a non-actual one.
And that's what you just said. It was a very, very important point. A business development representative contacted me and basically asked 5 questions, which were designed. There was only one question that was actually gathering information other than questions that were designed to simply rule me in or rule me out as a qualified lead. So he was performing what's known as BANT, budget, authority, needs, and timeline. And he did so just fine. I was being very, what's the right word? I was a good customer. I was giving him everything he asked for in an honest way. But as far as the customer is concerned, as far as I was concerned, did I get any value at all out of that initial interaction? What do you think?
Zero. It's a waste of time.
It was, all it ended up doing was setting a second meeting, so blocking out another, basically consuming another 30 or hour slot on my calendar. Next thing that took place was just slippage, and this will happen in organizations where the demo guy got on the call with me and went through the same questions. Didn't take very much time, but very frankly, as a customer, I was quietly annoyed at being asked those same questions the second time. And all I need to do to reference how annoying this is cite any interaction people have with a cable company or telephone company where you're transferred to 3 different representatives and have to and have to enter or at least verbally offer your secret passwords or various confirmations of who you are and what the account is 3 times over because they're not passing it through the system. So that was an annoyance. But what did he demo to me first?
The product you already use?
The product I already know and use. And he made an assumption, even though I had already communicated that I was already familiar with their original product, he made an assumption that he needed to show me that product. So he wasted 25 minutes mutually of our time showing me something that I already was familiar with and didn't need to see. And then finally at the very end of this, he finally got to, or they as a team, finally got to answering what I originally had asked, which is, let me get a look at your new offering. So that is a fairly traditional interaction. And Ramsey, what you said a moment ago is very, very important. You said discovery was, what did you say? How did you phrase it?
I said there was an attempt at a discovery, but not an actual one.
Exactly. There was an attempt at discovery, not an actual one. I cannot tell you how many people in our industry would in fact say, oh, discovery was complete. By answering those 5 questions, we now, the vendor, have all we need to know to be able to present a demo to this customer. So let's ignore the fact that the gentleman presented a demo of the first product they already knew about, and let's just say he'd gone straight to the new product and that it was just fine. Had he done discovery, what do you think with those 5 questions?
Still no, because he doesn't. He's. If I understood you correctly, he asked you if you had pain, but they didn't go into details of what that pain was. So how
That's
are they?
correct.
How are they?
Yep.
How would they demo anything to you if they don't know what they're solving?
Exactly. And that is a symptom of what many, many organizations do. So fundamental principle number 1, what many people believe is discovery, I would say is simple qualification. It's qualification. And qualification is all about ruling a prospect in or out as a qualified lead. Are you the guy that's going to make the decision? Do you have a budget? Do you have a time frame? Do you have a set of defined needs? If the answers are yes to those, then I'm a qualified lead. To which I would ask the question, am I really? Probably answer rhetorically, maybe. But discovery, very frankly, has not been done. So let's go back to your original question. Discovery defined is the process of collecting information to enable a precise proposal of a solution to a customer problem. So if we apply that definition, had this particular vendor collected sufficient information to enable a precise proposal of a solution for my situation?
No.
And I'd say, yeah, resoundingly no. So what else? Let's just play it sort of as a simple role play. What else might that gentleman have asked? So let's say that the tool was a tool to take a look at email traffic and try to understand email traffic between prospects and a vendor to try to understand are there words or phrases or emails that are more successful than others in leading towards closed business. In other words, what works best via email communication for between this vendor and their customers. So what kinds of questions might you have added to that list of 5 to begin to really broaden this out?
Well, spitballing here, but off the top of my head, since you requested the demo, the first question I would ask is, what interested you in requesting the demo in hopes to
Perfect.
understand what issue you're having?
And I would have said, well, right now there are many, many tools out there to help with phone and web conversations using Zoom and GoToMeeting and WebEx, for example, to be able to analyze those conversations and determine which reps are doing a great job, a good job, or an insufficient job based on their close rates and what's going on in their pipelines. And what I wanted to do was to extend that to the world of email. because a very, very large number of communications take place with prospects, between prospects and vendors via email. And I thought, wow, this is great. It sounds really exciting. So I was hoping to do the same thing, apply the same concepts to email as it was to currently today to web recorded conversations or phone recorded conversations. And then what might you have asked?
Well, right now the question that's popping in my head, how would it help you to have that information on the email as well?
And the answer would have been, well, my hope and expectation is it would give me templates of emails that work well, and to avoid examples of emails that don't work well that I could then socialize into the field. I could find out what are the, if you will, the highest performing phrases, paragraphs, sentences in responses to certain types of situations, for example, so that the ultimate goal would be to increase close rates, decrease sales cycle time, and just do a better job overall with communications. So one way to pursue this is to take a look at what do we need to understand to have really completed discovery. And the answer to that is a very, very difficult question at one level and really easy at another. Because it may not require a lot of information from the vendor side, but there's a second party here that's involved. So let's develop a second example. And let's say that you've been sick. You've had what you believe is the flu for the past 5 or 6 days. Actually, I think this actually took place not long ago. Is that right? Didn't you have the flu a few weeks back, or?
Yeah, I had a cold.
Okay. And it lingered for 5 or 6 days until your better half finally said, Ramzi, go to the doctor, go to the hospital, and see if it's really the flu or if it's something more serious. So you go to the hospital, you present at hospital number 1, doctor number 1, and the doctor says, what seems to be a problem? You say, well, I think I have the flu. And he asks, where do you work? And you tell him, he says, oh yeah, everybody's got the flu there, it's been going around. And he prescribes, he writes a prescription for a powerful new medicine called Flubigon, hands it to you and says, go ahead and get that prescription filled, start taking the pills, and you should feel better in a couple of days. So a couple of questions about that interaction for you. Number 1, how did you feel about that interaction? And then number 2, what's the likelihood that you or your family would get that prescription filled and start taking those pills?
Well, I feel like I really did his job for him. All he had to do was prescribe something, and I would hope more from a doctor.
Right?
The likelihood of me filling in the prescription, well, if you know my wife, it's 100%. But if it's up to me, then not so much.
Okay. And why not so much? I agree. Why not so much?
I have no confidence in his. Well, he didn't diagnose. He didn't test anything. He just assumed a problem that may or may not be there. It could be something completely different. He didn't confirm or do anything to deny that.
Exactly. So you're uncomfortable. You decide, well, I don't know if this guy's right or wrong, but I just don't feel comfortable. So you go across town to hospital number 2, and you meet with doctor number 2 at this different hospital, and you present, and you say the same exact thing. You say, I think I have the flu. He says, yeah, it's been going around. And he says, well, how long have you had it? And you say 6 days. And he says, are you running a fever? Are you running a temperature? And you reply. He asks about, are you sweating? Do you have nausea? Do you have aches and pains? And he invests with you another 8 doctor minutes, which are long minutes, asking you questions, at the end of which he prescribes exactly the same Flubigon drug that doctor number 1 also prescribed. Now, same 2 questions. How did you feel about that interaction, and what's the likelihood you get that prescription filled and take those pills?
Better. I felt that he cared enough to ask me some more questions, and he is more sure about his answer. And with or without my wife, I'd probably fill in the subscription.
Okay, good. Now, here's the very interesting thing. Both doctors arrived at the same conclusion, the same diagnosis, and the same prescription for a solution. But you're much more comfortable with doctor number 2. Why?
Well, he took the time. He asked questions. from a doctor perspective, he showed that he cared and not just trying to get rid of me and sell me something.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
And there's actually a lot more to it, because this is what happens in the world of software sales. Very, very often, we as vendors already know our customers' problems intimately. We already know what pains they're suffering because we've seen them hundreds of times over and over and over again. Would you agree?
Yes.
And the challenge, though, is that the customer doesn't yet know that you understand their situation sufficiently. So one of the questions that many people will ask is, well, how much discovery is enough? And I would say there are two elements to answering that question. Number one is when the vendor has sufficient information in hand to confidently and clearly propose a precise solution. In other words, you as the doctor have done sufficient diagnostic questions and diagnostic methods. You really know with a high certainty that what the problem is and how to address it. But there's another party involved, and that's the other portion. Part number two is when the customer believes that the vendor has a sufficient understanding of his or her situation, of the customer's situation. Both of those conditions need to be satisfied for enough discovery to have been done. So let me pause and ask, does that make sense? And comments or questions on that?
Well, it does make sense to me. If I can summarize, there's two sides to the coin. One, for me as a sales engineer to confidently know that I understand the customer's problem. And the other side is that the customer is confident that I am confident in understanding their problem.
Exactly, that you've asked enough questions. And this is I think this is one of the key ideas for doing discovery for enterprise software, for small little tools. Let's to a certain degree, the less expensive the order, probably the less discovery that needs to be done. But when you're dealing with typical enterprise software of orders that are, let's say, $25,000 per year or more, up to the millions, customers want to be treated like a hospital patient who has a serious concern, a serious potential affliction. They really want to make sure that your diagnosis is correct. They really want to make sure that you have asked sufficient questions and you're not missing anything, so that when it's time for surgery, it's not just a guessing game. I had a colleague who actually used that as an analogy. He says, "Oh, why bother with this? Is the bad doctor, if you will. Oh, why bother with doing discovery or diagnosis? Let's just open them up and see what we find."
Why not?
Why not? Yeah, I can tell you why not. So that's, I think, an important principle. There's something else here that's going on that I'd like to introduce as well, and that's the way that SDRs and BDRs and let's say less experienced salespeople tend to operate, which is, a lead comes in, somebody clicks on that button that says, "I'm interested in your product, I'm interested in your offering," and they reach out to you and they basically ask very, very sharp questions. Do you have a budget? Do you have a timeline? You're the guy. And I don't know if have you ever been on the customer side of the table and had a salesperson ask an open-ended question like, "What keeps you up at night?" Have you ever heard that or heard that done to you?
I haven't been a customer, so I haven't heard it done to me, but I've seen good account managers do that to customers.
So I can tell you that at an early portion of a conversation, if somebody asked me, "What keeps you up at night?" my response would be, salespeople that ask that question too early in a sales call.
Right.
And here's what I mean by that. Most customers are willing to talk about pain and their problems to a degree, but equally, most customers really need to be warmed up. It's kind of like if we continue with the hospital analogy. You go to the hospital, you don't see a doctor right away. You're taken into an intermediary area after you've filled out all your forms. And what do? Before you led to the exam room, but after you filled all the forms, what do they do? A nurse does what with you?
Discovery.
They do preliminary. They do.
Yeah.
They take your blood pressure, right? They check your heart rate, they take your temperature, they weigh you, they may see how tall you are. And what they're doing is, to a certain degree, is they're preparing you for a real discovery conversation. They're doing, if you will, human demographics to a certain degree. And they do that partially because they need that information, but also partially psychologically to gently move the patient from the world of I think I'm okay, but I'm not sure, to the world of, well, we really need to do some diagnosis here. And I think we can apply that same concept when we're talking about doing discovery for enterprise software. Somebody will call and say, I'm interested in your offerings, for example, with demo skills workshops in my case. And I'll say, terrific, and we'll start to talk. And one of my first questions is, tell me about yourself. How did you ascend to this position of power and authority at Company X? And you get a chuckle, but then what do they begin to do?
Telling you about themselves?
Yeah, and people are most comfortable talking about whom?
Themselves.
Themselves. So they'll talk about, how they got in that position. They'll talk about 2 or 3 of their previous companies. They'll invest a paragraph or two, and interestingly, 2 things are going on. One is you're actually learning some very useful and interesting information, and they're growing more comfortable because they're talking and they're comfortable about what they're talking about. So the topic here for discovery has to do with timing and flow. Timing and flow. You can start out a discovery conversation really just by launching into the customer's pain and their workflows, but I prefer to wait a little bit until the customer is really comfortable and feels that you're really interested in their situation. So likening this to the doctor, doctors and nurses will ask very simple, let's say demographics-oriented types of questions before they really begin to talk about, gee, the pain that you have down on that lower right-hand side, it could just be gas or it could be acute appendicitis. But before we get there, let's take a look at some other things just to begin to help us understand your situation. So if somebody calls me up and says, I'm interested in a demo skills class potential, I'll say, great, so tell me about yourself. We have a minute or two of conversation. I'll say, tell me about your team. How many folks? Where are they located? What are the geographies? What are their backgrounds like? What's their longevity? These questions are designed to be easy to ask and, even more importantly, easy to answer. The customer gets comfortable. They talk about their team for a while. I ask about their sales counterparts. If we were talking about a pre-sales organization, we do the same thing. We will invest, in many cases, 20 or 25 minutes of demographics-related information, information about the company, about the competition. Is it greenfield? Is it replacement of existing systems? How are they perceived in the marketplace? All that before I ask anything having to do with pain. And I will then perhaps ask a pain-oriented question, get an answer. I may probe it gently a little bit, but then I get off it and go back to other, let's say, more neutral but important topics.
So,
and the concept, go ahead.
Just a question here. A lot of people today say that there isn't enough time, or the customers don't have time to actually chit-chat with you, so you should get straight to the point. I want to clarify, are you, what you're doing is not small talk. It is to the point, just you're understanding the, I guess, the infrastructure that they have before going in deep. Is that accurate?
That's exactly accurate. And we go back to our doctor analogy. The kinds of things I'm asking are things like, so, do you have does your family have a history of any kinds of things that might look like this? How often have you been sick in the past? Have been, are the folks sick at work? Did you eat anything that was uncomfortable recently? So these are just simple questions to begin to put gentle boundaries around what might be likely as a diagnosis. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're not asking are they enjoying fishing or how the weather is?
No,
you're asking
absolutely not.
Pieces that you need for the puzzle so that you can provide a proposal that's accurate.
Our objective is to end up with a very holistic view of their situation, about their team, their sales cycles, their sales processes, the nature of their demos, whether or not they do POCs, RFPs, users groups, third parties, partners, resellers. Are they international? Are they global? How much is done over the web? How much is done face to face? All that before I even ask any questions, or let's say while I'm getting towards the direction of, well, now let's talk about the team's demos specifically. So I could have started with that. I could have said, well, you're interested in a demo skills workshop. Tell me about the team. What do you not like about their demos? And what you get as an answer would be a couple of 2-3 good things. They'd say, they're too technical. It's like training. They're not, they're just communicating feature, and there's no value associated with it. But very frankly, that's what I already probably know is likely about that customer situation. And while I need to confirm it, what I really want to understand are all the other things that contribute to that situation of the way they're giving demos today. And as a result, I need to understand much more than what I like to refer to as the direct workflow. So the direct workflow for demos is, you get a request for demo, and then what happens? I find out what discovery information I have and from my sales rep or the CRM system, and then I go forward and give a demo. Well, that's a pretty simple workflow. But what's missing from that are all these other factors that I was talking about. For example, it'd be very important for me to know going into demo skills training session if part of their sales process is to offer, for example, a free POC, a free trial, because that changes the whole dynamic of what the demo might be for with respect to their software. Does that make sense?
How so?
Okay. So this idea of timing and flow is very, very important to the conversation with somebody who's really interested in solving their problem and is willing to invest some time to do that. And that's an important point. Very typically, discovery conversations in this particular business I'm doing now take place in two separate calls. The first call is often scheduled for 30 minutes. And around the 25-minute mark, I will often say something like, hey, Ramsey, there's a pile more questions I need to ask you and should ask you. But we should probably set up a second call to do that. Are you willing and interested to go through that? And there's two sets of answers. What are they?
Yes. Or I'm assuming no.
Yeah. And what does it tell you if they say yes?
They're willing to put in some skin in the game, which means they're serious.
Exactly. And they really want to solve their problem. This would be like somebody going to the hospital and saying, I've had a stomach complaint for the past 4 months. I've taken aspirin, this, that, and the other thing. It just doesn't work. And the doctor says, well, it does an exam of you, and it says, I don't see anything immediately problematic, but what I'd like to do is have you come back in and run some real tests and diagnostic systems. Are you willing to do that? And the answer then is, well, it doesn't really feel that bad. It would mean, no, I'm not. I'm scared of hospitals, and I don't want to find anything wrong with me, by the way. Or the guy says, yeah, actually, this has been bothering me, and I really want to solve this problem. So a yes answer is a terrific sales cycle process step because it means that this person really wants to solve his or her problem. A no answer says, no, I think you've got enough information. Just send me pricing, then I know exactly where we stand, which is he's interested but not yet serious, or she's interested and not yet serious.
Or
thoughts on that? Yeah.
Or you could be column fodder, as the solution selling calls it.
Or you're column fodder. Yeah, absolutely.
So
just send us pricing information.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit. But who's doing this discovery? Is it the account manager or is it the SE?
So the answer could easily be yes. In many organizations, the account manager does what is often referred to as business discovery, and the SE or the pre-sales person has the charter to do more, let's say, technical discovery. Tell me about the workflow. Tell me about the other software products that are involved. Tell me about your IT structure and so forth. And they often would work with different parties on the customer side to perform discovery with multiple individuals. That's a very, very typical kind of a scenario.
Okay. In my experience, every time my account manager does the discovery, I end up with wrong information, at least in my previous job. So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
well, in their
Why is that
defense,
happening?
well, because my field is fairly technical. Like I'm in networking, there's a lot of protocols, a lot of information within information, like it's nested information that I need to know in order to do a proper demo. And
Hmm.
when the account manager hears a word like OSPF, he think that's all there is to it. And OSPF is a routing protocol.
Right.
But there's so many nuances within it. And when I ask him, hey, which part does he want? Oh, he just wants a basic overview of what this is. Why? I don't know. Can you do a demo? And at first I would say yes, sure, but now it's changed. I changed my tunes. But yeah, like, I personally prefer doing the discovery myself. That way, if I screw up the demo, it's my fault, and I don't have anybody else to blame.
I would say that is a good direction to go because it fundamentally suggests that your audience is more technical than business oriented, but you may be missing out on some important pieces of information as well. Um,
We do it as a team.
again,
Like we're supposed to both be there. I want him to be there to ask business questions. Although right now, after a few years, I am qualified. I just don't want to do that because I don't want to muddy the name of sales engineer. And then there's myself. I'm doing the technical portion of it, but we're doing it together.
so that the tag team approach can be very, very effective, and it makes sense to work back and forth. There's a Gong IO study that suggested that having two people from the vendor side and one person on the customer side overwhelms the customer, and that may be true. And you may want to actually schedule separate calls, either with the same individual or with different people, so you can do business discovery via, let's say, your account manager, sales rep counterpart, and then the technical discovery via pre-sales.
Okay, good to know.
So I want to introduce one additional concept, and that has to do with I'll tell you the punchline, and then we can investigate that.
Start from the
I
end.
was doing, pardon me.
You were starting from the end.
I always like to start from the end. You know that. So I was doing discovery with a head of sales of an organization, and it was this topic. We were talking about discovery, and I was asking, well, who does discovery in the organization, and how well does the team do it? And then I laughingly stopped and asked, what proportion of your sales team does discover? Let's see, does an insufficient job at doing discovery, but believe they are good at it? And he says, hang on, let me close my door. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that there's a prevalent problem with account managers and sales engineers that they don't know what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. In
So
my
that's
mind,
one thing.
that's coaching.
There's a
Go ahead.
there's a subtle thing though here. He at that point, because I had asked enough questions to earn his trust and credibility.
Right.
When I asked that question, what proportion of your team believes they do discovery well but really doesn't? And he said, hold on, let me close my door. What he's basically saying is, I'm willing to share information with you, Peter, that I don't want the rest of my team to hear.
Yeah. That's
And that's delightful. When you're doing discovery and your customer says, oh, that's a really good question, I should know the answer to that, you're actually adding value back into their processes. So, for example, I'll ask something of a pre-sales manager along the lines of, what's your no decision rate like? And I'd say about half the time they say, I don't know. And then I can hear them pause, and then they'll often say, I really should know that. And you can almost hear them writing it down. Or I'll ask, what's your win rate for POCs? Or what's your win rate for certain types of demos? And a good portion of the time, they don't have those metrics. They don't have those numbers. And they say, oh, that's a great question. I should really track that down. So an interesting idea in discovery is that it should not be one-sided. There's a gentle requirement for the vendor to remember quid pro quo. that you need occasionally to give the customer back something that's of use and value to them, where we are asking lots of questions, but from time to time we need to give some guidance, give a comparison of their situation with others, or at least just provide them with some insights, almost a challenger-like insight that they may have been unaware of as they're going through this. So let me pause there and ask, is this making sense so far?
Yes, it is. So I do have, generally speaking, when you get called into a meeting, the customer has an issue in mind. Now, you start asking questions. Are you trying to discover other issues, or are you trying to build on that one issue that you already know the customer has?
So that's actually part of, I think, one of the objectives of the discovery is to really understand the customer's situation so that if there are other options to propose, you're able to include those as a solution to, let's say, either the existing problem or a larger problem that you've uncovered. And that is, I'd say, hence one of the purposes of doing sufficient discovery. Does that logic make sense?
Yes, it does. What do you do if the customer, like, you see that the customer has an issue and you're trying to build on that, but the customer doesn't see it or doesn't understand how much it's costing them or affecting them negatively?
So excellent question. Again, one of the purposes of the discovery is to begin to quantify the customer's situation and to determine exactly, what is the value of making the change. So, for example, I mentioned no decision rates, and so I might ask, what do you think your no decision rate is today? And the customer says, well, I think it's probably about 45 or 50%. Which point I might ask, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I might say something. Sorry to hear that. That's pretty much right in the middle of the range. What would you like to drive that down to if you could? And the customer says, oh, I'd love to get that down to 20 or 25% because that's really where it's much more acceptable. So that's called a delta, uncovering a delta, a difference between the way things are today and the way things either need to be or could be in the future. And as you go through a discovery conversation, you should be looking for opportunities to uncover those kinds of deltas. You should have them planned out. So, for example, I may ask things with demo skills workshops, gee, what percent of demos do you feel are just wasted for one reason or another? Or what's your win rate for demos of certain types, or POCs, or RFPs? What's your no decision rate? And all those then contribute to an understanding of what value could be gained as a result of making the change.
All right. In many cases, at least in where I work, where, like, for maybe in the domain that you're in, when you say you want to drop it down from 40% to 20%, that makes the customer pay attention, or at least he comes up with that number. In some domains, mine for example, the customer may not see a benefit in something that I can obviously see.
Well, so that's how to describe it. That's part of the challenge, and I think part of the essence of doing discovery is to build that vision in the customer's mind and this is sort of a combination discovery and vision discussion of what's possible and what's reasonable in a situation like theirs. Many people in the world of demos, people will often ask, how do you decide what's better? And there are a range of different metrics that one might track and measure and track, if you will, to try to really determine that. Most organizations don't measure anything today with respect to the effectiveness of their demos. They just execute them. Some organizations track how many demos are done overall. An interesting metric so here's an example of how you could guide somebody into that kind of a realization. You could ask, well, if you take a look at how many demos were presented over the last, let's say, quarter by your team, how many pieces of closed business did those lead to, and what was the value of those closed businesses? You can begin to tease out, number of demos on average required to close an order of certain range. You can even begin to understand a more wonderfully sensitive metric of revenue dollars per demo delivered. And if they begin to take a look at some of those metrics and measure them either against what some of the standards might be or their performance over time, then they have an opportunity to begin to establish baselines and actually seek some tangible improvements.
Well, I want to thank you because that's exactly where I wanted you to go.
Yay!
Because a lot of SEs that I've seen and I've worked with, we see discovery as a needs analysis. We just go in and ask them what they need and then we walk out. We don't use it as a vision building meeting as well.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's like when you see a problem staring you in the face and the customer can't see it, you're gonna have to turn the questions around from what do you need to would you prefer, how would it be like imagine this situation, would it be good for you, how would it be good for you, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
So one or two additional ideas I think we have time for in the next 10 minutes.
Sure.
One has to do with going beyond the typical workflow questions. And the example I could offer here is, let's go back to your experience now. The person who's been suffering from what you believe is the flu, and you've had it for a week, and you go and present, and you talk to your doctor, and he asks things about your takes your temperature, are you sweating and nausea and so forth. What he's done with all those questions are taking a look at, if you will, the workflow. In other words, you're a person, you walk in, you have all these sort of standard things that you look at, but what has he not done is taken a look at, let's say, stepped back and taken a slightly different perspective. So if I was that doctor, I might have asked things like, did you eat anything that disagreed with you a week ago before you had these symptoms, for example? In other words, maybe it's not the flu, maybe it's some kind of allergic reaction to something that you ate. Maybe you're gluten intolerant in some way, and we need to look at that. And I might ask questions around that direction. A great example is I would ask, have you been out of the country, particularly to a region of the earth where the water may have been contaminated, because maybe you're suffering from an amoeba-like bug, a giardiasis or something like that. So when people are doing discovery on their with their customers for enterprise software, one thing to begin to ask about are contributing factors beyond the workflow itself. I'll give you some examples. So if you're looking at enterprise software, you might want to ask questions about the nature of the culture of the prospect's organization. Are they an early adopter? Are they a fast follower? Are they a majority type of a customer? Are they a late majority that really doesn't want to have to make a change? Do they embrace change? What are their what's the culture like internally? These are things that contribute very, very importantly to, if you will, the diagnosis and are key elements of discovery, but people rarely think about them. So thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's kind of... isn't that similar to the questions you were asking about? Tell me about yourself, like your organization, like trying to understand the broad picture so that you can go in deep.
Exactly. And along those lines, one additional idea I wanted to share is the idea of uniqueness. Every organization, and indeed every individual, but every organization has a perception that they are unique. And my experience, it's very important to uncover and address those perceived uniqueness issues for each of your customers. Now, here's a very interesting observation on that. The definition of a market is effectively that there's enough customers in the space that you could put together an offering that will be consumed by all of them reasonably happily, which means that they're all the same to a certain degree. But I've never come across a customer that says, oh yeah, we're the same as everyone else, just give me what everybody else has.
Yeah.
And what they're really saying in the opposite is, you need to understand how we're unique, how we perceive ourselves as being different. Because once you understand that, then you have a key element of the way we work that we really want and need you to know about, even though it's rarely something that's asked in a traditional process. Does that all resonate?
Yeah, well, I've worked with multiple vendor, like network element manufacturing equipment like Cisco, Ciena, Nokia, and they do the same thing. but they're all different in how they do it and how they want us to perceive them.
Exactly. Yeah, it's perceived uniqueness.
But
So
for
there
some
you
reason,
go.
they're all interested in what each other does, too.
Yeah, they want to know how they compare, but
Yeah.
they also perceive as individuals.
Okay.
Cool.
Ca-
Anything else?
Well, I do have a fire round, or not so fire round, where I ask the same questions to everybody. But do you mind if I ask you one more question? This came to me
Sure.
from a listener, and I actually had the same problem, but I figured out how to solve it. Being in a very complicated, uh, technologically advanced sales engineering world, there are so many nuances and differences. When I work with customers, usually the customers know more than I do. Um, so they know in details what they want. I don't know all the details. And when I show up to do a demo, that's when they start going into the details versus telling me about them in the discovery. How would you recommend someone in this position, like me and the listener, do to actually overcome this?
I think one of the easiest way to do that is to make a list of the things that you want to currently want to try to uncover during the demo, and reflect that list back as elements of a discovery document that you really would like to add to the discovery conversation before you get into a demo. Because then what you're showing in the demo is not a question, it's simply a response to what you and the customer have decided they really need to see.
Perfect. All right, so now it's time to the not so fire round. By the way, I did something similar. I just didn't come up with a document. I just targeted some person in the customer side that I know and I have a good relationship with, and I asked to do the demo to him before I do it to the rest of the team, so that he can tell me.
And that's another whole topic, which is how to work with your champion, your coach, and that can actually be a set of discovery questions that's worth pursuing on its own. So, good idea.
Oh, thank you. All right, so the not so fire round. These are 4 questions I ask everybody. What is the one thing you love about your current job as a demo coach or SE coach, or you don't have a title per se? So how what do you love about what you do today?
Changing the world one demo at a time.
Nice.
For the better. For the better.
Is that your tagline? Is that your website's tagline?
No, but that would be a great tagline.
It should be, yes.
Thank you.
All right. What is the one thing you would change about your job?
That's a terrific question. More of me would be nice.
Okay. No cloning yet?
No.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So basically, you need to automate some.
I don't know if it's automated. I would just like to. I'd like there to be more people doing this.
Okay. Not necessarily as part of your company or as part of your company. Just more people training SEs to become better, changing the world one demo at a time.
Exactly.
Okay. So you have your book, A Great Demo. That's a summarized title. It's a longer title, which I always butcher, so I'm not going to say. Do you want to...
Great demo sufficient.
A great demo is sufficient. All right. Well, it's going to be in the show notes anyways. Is there another resource that every SE should be either reading or exposed to?
There are many, many, many. I've got one that is nothing to do with methodology, but everything to do with how people are presenting information. It's Edward Tufte's first work, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information, which really discusses graphs and related kinds of tools for displaying information. And that's a terrific book that I think anyone that's doing anything having to do with dashboards in particular would find extraordinarily useful.
Perfect. I'll have it in the show notes. Last question. What advice would you give a sales engineer that you feel they don't get from anybody else?
Go find a mentor. Go find somebody in your organization that is not directly in your team or department that can serve to be a colleague and mentor you. Somebody in finance, somebody in operations, somebody in an area that you're unfamiliar with, to give you a separate perspective, a different perspective of what goes on in the business. That's a terrific approach.
Okay, that's good. That's a good way to end the show. Thank you,
All
Peter.
right.
Thank you, Peter, for coming on.
My pleasure, sir. Have a great afternoon.
Likewise. Thank you, Peter, for coming on the show and wanting to help as many people as possible. I wish we could have more than one Peter Cohan. And we may not have one Peter Cohan, but there are John Kerr, Brian Geary that are available to help as well. We still need a lot more of all of you guys. Thank you guys for listening and sticking all the way through the show. This was fun. Listening to Peter talk about his experiences as a customer. I've actually never been a customer. So just listening to how some customers suffer as we go through our jobs is just interesting and eye-opening. I never thought about it I think about it from their perspective, but I never thought that doing my job might be torture for somebody else. So hopefully with this information that was provided on this podcast, we can do a proper discovery to help our customers. And, maybe they won't hate being around us. I think my customers like me though. But then again, I live my own little world. The books and the research paper from gong.io can be found in the show notes. WeTheSalesEngineers.com/show54. I do have a meeting notes template, and that's what I use whenever I'm doing a discovery or demo needs analysis to make sure that I'm properly prepared and ask the right questions during the discovery, and so that in the end I have all the answers that I need to do a demo for them, not a canned demo. If you want to download that, just go to WeTheSalesEngineers.com/meeting-notes, or you can find it on the homepage. So WeTheSalesEngineers.com/meeting-notes. And that's it for me, guys. I look forward to talking to you again next week. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.